The old pickup truck rattled as Marcus Johnson drove down the narrow, dusty road that led to his hometown of Willow Creek. It had been over 20 years since he'd set foot in this small Georgia town, and yet, everything seemed exactly the same. The cracked asphalt roads, lined with wildflowers and patches of weeds, stretched out endlessly before him. The weathered wooden sign at the edge of town still read, "Welcome to Willow Creek. Population 742, though Marcus doubted anyone bothered to update the number after all these years. Marcus sighed deeply as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. He wasn't here for a happy reunion or a nostalgic trip down memory lane. His mother, Evelyn Johnson, had passed away 2 weeks ago, leaving behind an empty house and unanswered questions. Her death came suddenly. Heart attack, according to the doctor, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. She had always been strong-willed, stubborn even, and her passing felt too abrupt, too final. As he pulled up to the modest white house where he grew up, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. The paint on the porch railing was peeling now, and the once vibrant flower beds were overrun with weeds. For a moment, he sat in the truck, staring at the place that held so many memories, good and bad. He remembered summers spent chasing fireflies in the backyard, Christmases huddled around the fireplace, and long nights when he'd lie awake listening to his mother cry softly in her room. Those tears had never made sense to him as a child, but now, as an adult, they weighed heavily on his mind. Stepping out of the truck, Marcus grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat and walked slowly toward the front door. The key his aunt had sent jingled nervously in his hand as he unlocked it. The scent of lavender and cedarwood greeted him as soon as he stepped inside, a comforting yet haunting reminder of his mother's presence. Everything looked untouched, as if time itself had frozen within these walls. The furniture was covered in thin layers of dust, and the air carried a faint mustiness, but otherwise it was just as he remembered. He wandered through the living room, running his fingers along the surface of the coffee table. Framed photographs lined the shelves, pictures of him as a boy, smiling brightly beside his mother, pictures of family gatherings long forgotten. But one photo caught his attention. It was tucked slightly behind the others, almost hidden. Picking it up, Marcus frowned. In the picture, his mother stood next to a man he didn't recognize. They looked happy, their arms wrapped around each other like lovers. Who was this man? And why hadn't his mother ever mentioned him? Before he could dwell on it further, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Marcus placed the photo back on the shelf and went to answer it. Standing on the porch was Mrs. Delaney, the elderly neighbor who lived next door. Her gray hair was neatly pinned atop her head, and her wrinkled face bore a look of quiet concern. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I heard you were coming back." "Mrs. Delaney," Marcus replied, forcing a polite smile. "It's good to see you again." She nodded, though her eyes darted past him into the house. "Your mama, she was a fine woman. We'll miss her dearly." "Thank you," Marcus said, shifting uncomfortably under her gaze. Something about the way she looked at him made his skin crawl, as if she knew something he didn't. There was a pause, and then Mrs. Delaney spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, your mama kept secrets. Lots of them." Marcus blinked, taken aback. What kind of secrets? But Mrs. Delaney didn't answer. Instead, she gave him a sad smile, patted his arm awkwardly, and turned to leave. "Take care of yourself, Marcus," she called over her shoulder as she shuffled back toward her own house. Standing there on the porch, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Secrets? What could she possibly mean? Shaking his head, he closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling sharply. This visit was supposed to be simple, a chance to say goodbye to his mother and clear out her belongings. But already, he sensed that nothing about this trip would be easy. Little did Marcus know, the secrets buried in Willow Creek ran deeper than he could have imagined, and uncovering them would change his life forever. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his bedroom window. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. For a moment, he lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in his chest after Mrs. Delaney's cryptic words the day before. Secrets? What secrets could his mother have kept from him all these years? He got dressed quickly and decided to start sorting through her belongings. Maybe if he focused on practical tasks, he could push aside the nagging questions swirling in his mind. As he made his way downstairs, the house felt eerily quiet, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to disturb the stillness. In the kitchen, Marcus found an old coffee pot tucked away in one of the cabinets. It took some effort to get it working, but eventually, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. He poured himself a cup and carried it out to the porch, hoping the fresh air would help clear his thoughts. Sitting down on the creaky wooden swing, he sipped the warm liquid and let his gaze wander over the overgrown yard. That's when he noticed Mrs. Delaney standing by her fence, watching him intently. She looked frail in her faded floral dress, her hands gripping the weathered wood tightly. Her expression was unreadable, part curiosity, part caution. When she saw him glance her way, she hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached the porch. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, her voice soft but strained. "How are you settling in?" "I'm doing okay," Marcus replied, forcing a polite smile. "Just getting started with going through my mom's things." Mrs. Delaney nodded, though her eyes darted nervously toward the house behind him. "Your mama. She worked hard to keep this place together. Always did what she thought was best." Marcus frowned slightly. There was something about the way she spoke, as that she was choosing her words carefully. "You knew her well, didn't you?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Oh, yes," Mrs. Delaney said quickly, almost too quickly. "We were neighbors for decades. Watched you grow up, too." She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "But there were things your mama never told anyone." "What kind of things?" Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued. Mrs. Delaney glanced around nervously, as though afraid someone might overhear. "Things about your daddy," she murmured finally, her voice barely audible. "My daddy?" Marcus repeated, his heart skipping a beat. His father had always been a mystery, a shadowy figure who disappeared before Marcus was even born. All he knew was what his mother had told him, that his father left town shortly after finding out she was pregnant. But now, hearing Mrs. Delaney talk about him, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Before he could press further, Mrs. Delaney shook her head firmly. "I shouldn't say more. It's not my place." And with that, she turned and hurried back to her own house, leaving Marcus sitting alone on the porch, his mind racing. Later that afternoon, while rummaging through a box of old letters in the attic, Marcus stumbled upon something that sent chills down his spine. Buried beneath stacks of bills and greeting cards was a faded photograph. At first glance, it looked like any other family portrait, but as Marcus held it closer, he realized the man standing beside his mother wasn't the same stranger he'd seen in the picture the day before. This man looked strikingly familiar. Too familiar. It was him, or rather, someone who looked exactly like him. The resemblance was uncanny. The same deep brown eyes, the same sharp jawline, even the same slight dimple on the left cheek. The only difference was the age. The man in the photo appeared to be in his late 20s, while Marcus himself was now pushing 40. Confused and unsettled, Marcus flipped the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, James and Evelyn, Spring 1978, Spring 1978. That was nearly 2 decades before Marcus was born. His hands trembled as he stared at the image. Who was this man? And why did he look so much like Marcus? Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. Could it? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus sat cross-legged on the attic floor, clutching the photograph tightly. Whatever secrets his mother had kept, they were bigger and darker than he ever imagined. The attic was dimly lit, with only a single bulb hanging from the ceiling casting a faint yellow glow. Dust particles floated lazily in the air as Marcus sat surrounded by boxes and old furniture. The photograph he'd found earlier lay on the floor beside him, its edges slightly worn from years of being tucked away. He couldn't stop staring at it, his mind racing with questions. Who was this man named James? Why did he look so much like Marcus? And why had his mother never mentioned him? Determined to find answers, Marcus pushed himself to his feet and began rummaging through the piles of forgotten belongings. Every box seemed to contain fragments of his childhood, old school projects, birthday cards, and even a baseball mitt he hadn't seen since he was 10. but none of it brought him closer to understanding the mystery of the photograph. Then, tucked beneath a stack of dusty quilts in the far corner of the attic, he spotted something unusual. It was a small wooden chest, no bigger than a shoebox, hidden almost deliberately under the clutter. Its surface was scratched and faded, but it looked sturdy, as if it had been built to hold something important. Curious, Marcus pulled it out and examined it closely. Unlike the other items in the attic, this chest was locked. Marcus frowned. His mother wasn't the type to keep things locked away, not that he knew of anyway. She had always been straightforward, practical, and open about everything. Or so he thought. Now, holding the mysterious box in his hands, he wondered how much she had truly kept hidden from him. He set the chest down on the floor and searched for a key. After a few minutes of digging through nearby boxes, he found a small ring of keys tucked inside an old tin canister labeled Household. One by one, he tried them in the lock until finally, there was a soft click. The lid creaked open, revealing a collection of items that made his blood run cold. Inside were several yellowed letters tied together with a frayed ribbon. Each envelope was addressed to someone named James Carter in neat handwriting. Beneath the letters were newspaper clippings, brittle with age, detailing a local scandal involving missing children from Willow Creek. The headlines screamed accusations. Asterisk, Cam gripped by fear as children vanish without a trace. Asterisk, and asterisk, police search for answers amidst growing panic. Asterisk. Marcus's hands trembled as he sifted through the contents of the box. Among the clippings was another photograph. A group shot taken outside what appeared to be the town church. In the center stood his mother, smiling brightly, her arm linked with none other than James Carter. Behind them loomed a shadowy figure whose face was partially obscured, but Marcus could swear it was the same man from the earlier photo. What disturbed him most, however, was a folded piece of paper tucked at the bottom of the box. When he unfolded it, he saw a handwritten note in his mother's unmistakable scrawl. Asterisk, if anything happens to me, tell Marcus the truth. He deserves to know who he really is. Asterisk. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. What truth? Who was he really? Marcus felt a wave of nausea wash over him as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, but not enough to make sense of the bigger picture. His resemblance to James, the cryptic warnings from Mrs. Delaney, the scandal involving missing children, it all pointed to something dark and deeply personal. As night fell, the attic grew colder, the shadows stretching across the walls like silent witnesses to his growing unease. Marcus sat there, the box resting on his lap, his mind overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, anger at his mother for keeping such secrets, anger at himself for not asking more questions when she was alive. But beneath the anger was fear, fear of what he might uncover next. With a deep breath, Marcus closed the box and carried it downstairs. He didn't know where to begin unraveling the tangled web of lies and half-truths, but one thing was clear. Whatever secrets his mother had buried, they weren't going to stay hidden any longer. The next morning, Marcus woke up feeling restless. The hidden box and its contents weighed heavily on his mind, making it impossible to focus on anything else. He couldn't shake the image of the newspaper clippings or the cryptic note from his mother. Something big had happened in Willow Creek decades ago, something that involved his family, and he needed answers. After grabbing a quick breakfast, Marcus decided to visit the town library. It was a small, one-room building tucked between a bakery and a hardware store, but it had always been a treasure trove of local history. As he pushed open the creaky door, the smell of old books and polished wood greeted him. Behind the counter sat Evelyn, the librarian, not to be confused with his late mother, who shared the same name. Evelyn looked up as Marcus entered, her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose. She gave him a warm smile, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Marcus Johnson," she said softly, "I heard you were back in town." "Yeah, I'm here for my mom's things," Marcus replied, returning her smile awkwardly. "But I need some help with something." Evelyn nodded, gesturing for him to sit at one of the wooden tables nearby. "What do you need?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, he pulled out one of the newspaper clippings from the box and slid it across the table. "Do you know anything about this? About the missing kids?" Evelyn's expression darkened as she studied the article. For a moment, she didn't say anything, her fingers tracing the faded text absently. Then, lowering her voice, she began to speak. It was a long time ago, before your time, but it shook this town to its core. Children started disappearing without a trace. Parents were frantic. The police searched everywhere, but they never found any solid leads. And my family? Marcus asked cautiously. Was my mom involved somehow? Evelyn sighed, adjusting her glasses nervously. Your mama, she tried to stay out of it. But people talked. Marcus. They whispered about your daddy, or whoever he was. Some said he wasn't the man everyone thought he was. Others claimed he left because he knew too much. Marcus leaned forward, his heart pounding. Knew too much about what? Evelyn glanced around the empty library, as if afraid someone might overhear. About the disappearances, she whispered finally. There were rumors, horrible rumors, that someone close to your family might have been connected. Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You mean my father? James Carter? She nodded slowly. That's what people used to say, but no one ever proved anything. And after he disappeared, folks stopped asking questions. Your mama did everything she could to protect you, Marcus, to shield you from the gossip and the pain. Her words hit him hard. Protect him from what? From the truth about his father? From whatever role their family played in the scandal. The more Evelyn spoke, the more Marcus realized how little he truly knew about his own life. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus sat alone in the living room, staring at the photograph of James and his mother. His mind raced with fragments of conversations, half-truths, and unanswered questions. Exhaustion finally overtook him, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep. But his dreams offered no relief. In them, shadowy figures surrounded him, their voices overlapping in angry whispers. Why are you digging? They demanded. Leave it buried. The faces were blurry, unrecognizable, yet somehow familiar, as if they belonged to people he'd known all his life. Suddenly, the whispers turned into screams, jolting Marcus awake. He sat up, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. The room was pitch black, save for a faint glow coming from the hallway. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but then he heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps moving upstairs. His breath caught in his throat. Was someone in the house? Gripping the baseball bat he kept by the couch, Marcus crept toward the staircase. Each step creaked beneath his weight, amplifying the silence. When he reached the top, he froze. The attic door was slightly ajar, even though he was sure he'd closed it earlier. Summoning his courage, Marcus pushed the door open and stepped inside. The attic was empty, bathed in pale moonlight streaming through the small window. But something felt different. The air was colder, heavier, as if the space itself was holding its breath. And then he saw it, a faint trail of dust leading to the far corner where the wooden chest had been hidden. Someone, or something, had moved it. As Marcus stood there, staring at the disturbed spot, he realized the secrets of Willow Creek weren't just buried in boxes or old newspapers. They were alive, lurking in the shadows, waiting for him to uncover them. The next morning, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in the house. The locket burned in Marcus's hand as he sat on the edge of his mother's bed, staring at the tiny engraving that read *redemption*. What did it mean? Was it a clue, a message from his father, or simply a memento of regret? The weight of everything he'd uncovered so far pressed down on him, his biological father's mysterious ties to the scandal, his mother's desperate attempts to protect him, and the eerie feeling that someone was watching him. He couldn't ignore the nagging thought that the secrets buried in Willow Creek weren't fully laid to rest. Determined to dig deeper, Marcus returned to the library later that afternoon. Evelyn greeted him with a cautious smile, her eyes flickering with concern. You're still chasing answers, she said softly, more of a statement than a question. I have to, Marcus replied firmly. This isn't just about my family anymore. It's about those missing kids. Someone needs to find out what really happened. Evelyn hesitated but eventually nodded. She led him to a dusty corner of the library where old maps and records were stored. If you're looking for something concrete, start here, she said, pulling out a large rolled-up map of Willow Creek. There's an area marked outside town limits, a field people used to call the Hollow. Kids would dare each other to go there when they were younger. Some say it's cursed. Cursed, Marcus repeated skeptically. Not literally, Evelyn clarified. But strange things happened around there back then. People avoided it after the disappearances. If there's any truth to the rumors, maybe that's where the answers are. Marcus thanked her and took the map home. That night, under the dim light of the kitchen table, he studied it closely. The hollow was located near the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods. On the map, someone had scribbled faint markings, an X drawn roughly in one section of the field. His heart raced as he realized this could be the site of unmarked graves, or worse. The next morning, armed with a shovel, gloves, and the map, Marcus drove to the location. The field was overgrown with tall grass and wildflowers, its serenity masking the darkness beneath. As he stepped out of his truck, a cold breeze swept through the area, sending shivers down his spine. For a moment, he stood frozen, questioning whether he was ready for what he might uncover. Shaking off his doubts, Marcus began digging where the X on the map indicated. The soil was hard and dry, making every swing of the shovel feel like an uphill battle. Hours passed, sweat dripping down his face, until finally, the blade struck something solid. Dropping to his knees, he brushed away the dirt and revealed a small wooden box buried just below the surface. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were personal belongings, children's toys, faded photographs, and pieces of clothing. Each item bore the initials of one of the missing children, LM embroidered on a tattered dress, TR carved into a toy car. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he realized these were keepsakes taken from the victims. Items meant to remember them by, yet left abandoned in this desolate place. Suddenly, a noise behind him made him freeze. Turning quickly, he scanned the field but saw nothing except swaying grass. Still, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Gathering the items carefully, he placed them back in the box and continued searching. A few feet away, he noticed fresh footprints leading toward the tree line. They didn't belong to animals. They were human. Heart pounding, Marcus followed the trail cautiously. The woods were eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. As he ventured deeper, he spotted a dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. Its windows were boarded up, and vines crept along its rotting walls, giving it an abandoned appearance. But smoke curled lazily from the chimney, betraying signs of life. Peering inside through a crack in the boards, Marcus saw two elderly men sitting at a crude wooden table. One of them looked frail and sickly, while the other leaned heavily on a cane. Their voices were low, arguing heatedly about something Marcus couldn't quite make out. Then, as the second man turned slightly, Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. It was James Carter, his biological father, alive and well. Shock rooted Marcus to the spot. How was this possible? Why had his father stayed hidden all these years? And why did he look so? Unchanged despite the decades that had passed. Before Marcus could process anything further, the sound of snapping twigs startled him. Realizing he'd been spotted, he ducked behind a tree, his mind racing. Whatever reconciliation or confrontation awaited him, one thing was certain. The shadows of the past had finally caught up with him, and they weren't letting go without a fight. Marcus crouched behind the tree, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The voices from inside the cabin grew louder, angrier, as if the two men were on the verge of a physical altercation. He couldn't make out every word, but snippets drifted through the cracks in the boards. Phrases like "too dangerous" and "you should've stayed gone." His father's voice was raspy yet eerily calm, while the other man sounded frantic, almost pleading. Taking a deep breath, Marcus knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. This was the moment he'd been searching for, the confrontation that would finally bring clarity to the tangled web of secrets surrounding his family. Slowly, he stood up and stepped into the clearing, his hands raised slightly to show he wasn't armed. "Who's there?" James barked sharply, turning toward the doorway with surprising speed for someone who looked so frail. When he saw Marcus standing there, his face went pale, and his eyes widened in shock. "Hello, Dad," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Or should I call you James?" For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched thin, heavy with unspoken words and decades of separation. Finally, James lowered himself onto a rickety chair, gripping his cane tightly, as if it might anchor him to reality. The other man, shorter, rounder, with a nervous twitch in his left eye, hovered near the door, glancing between Marcus and James as though unsure what to do next. "What are you doing here, boy?" James asked gruffly, breaking the tension. His tone was harsh, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes that betrayed his tough exterior. I came to find answers, Marcus replied, stepping closer. Answers about you, about Mom, about those kids who disappeared. You owe me that much. James sighed deeply, running a shaky hand over his face. You don't understand, son. There are things I did back then that I can't undo. Things your mama worked hard to protect you from. Protect me from what? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. From the fact that my own father may have been involved in kidnapping children. Is that what this is about? No, James snapped, slamming his fist against the table. The sudden outburst startled both Marcus and the other man. I didn't take those kids, Marcus. Not like you think. Then explain it. Marcus shot back, his frustration boiling over. Explain why people whispered about you leaving town after the scandal broke. Explain why Mom kept your picture hidden all these years. James hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a weary sigh, he began to speak. It's true, I made mistakes, James admitted, his voice trembling. Back then, I needed money. Badly. A man approached me with a deal, helped transport some packages out of town, and he'd pay me enough to start fresh. At first, I didn't ask questions. But when I realized what those packages were, his voice cracked, and he paused to collect himself. They were children, Marcus. Stolen from their families and sold to rich folks who couldn't have kids of their own. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. So you're telling me you helped traffic them? No, James insisted, shaking his head vehemently. I wanted out as soon as I found out, but by then, it was too late. They threatened me. If I talked, they'd come after your mama and you. So I ran. I disappeared to keep you safe. The confession hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. It was worse than he'd imagined, but also somehow less monstrous. His father hadn't been the monster everyone suspected. He'd been a coward, caught in a nightmare of his own making. And him? Marcus asked, nodding toward the other man who had remained silent throughout the exchange. That's Roger, James said bitterly. He was the one who recruited me into this mess. He works for the people behind it all, the ones pulling the strings even now. Roger shifted uncomfortably, his nervous twitch growing more pronounced. Look, kid, we didn't hurt anyone, he stammered. The kids, they were given new lives, better lives. Marcus clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Better lives? Do you even hear yourself? Those kids had families who loved them, families who never stopped looking for them. Before either man could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside the cabin. All three turned toward the sound just as shadows moved across the windows. Someone, or something, was approaching. Marcus instinctively reached for the pocket knife he always carried, his mind racing with possibilities. Had someone followed him here? Or was this part of whatever twisted operation his father had been tangled up in? Whatever it was, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The truth wasn't done revealing itself. Not yet. The sound of footsteps outside the cabin grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of leaves under heavy boots. Marcus's grip tightened on his pocket knife as he moved instinctively toward the door, his body tense and ready for whatever, or whoever, was approaching. James struggled to stand, leaning heavily on his cane, while Roger backed into a corner, his face pale with fear. Suddenly, the door burst open, revealing two figures silhouetted against the fading light of dusk. One was Sheriff Grayson, a man Marcus vaguely remembered from his childhood. The other was Mrs. Delaney, her frail frame shaking as she clutched the sheriff's arm for support. Marcus, the sheriff barked, his voice sharp but not unkind. What in God's name are you doing out here? Before Marcus could respond, Mrs. Delaney stepped forward, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I followed you earlier today after seeing you dig up that box. I thought it was finally time someone put an end to this. Marcus stared at her, stunned. You told them? About my dad? About all of this? Mrs. Delaney nodded, guilt etched across her features. It wasn't right to keep hiding the truth, not anymore. Not when lives are still hanging in the balance. Sheriff Grayson cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. We've been investigating these disappearances for years, he explained, his tone grim. But every lead went cold because no one wanted to talk. Folks were scared of the men who orchestrated this whole operation. Until now. James let out a bitter laugh, sinking back into his chair. So it's over then. After all these years, they finally found me. It's not just about you, the sheriff replied sternly. This goes higher than you, James. Much higher, but your confession, and Roger's, is enough to bring them down. Roger began to protest, sputtering excuses and half-truths, but the sheriff cut him off with a raised hand. Save it for the courtroom, he said coldly. Both of you are coming with me. As the sheriff cuffed James and Roger, Marcus stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. His father looked older now, defeated, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of decades of regret. For a moment, their eyes met, and Marcus saw something there he hadn't expected. Sorrow, yes, but also a flicker of hope. I never stopped loving you or your mama, James said quietly, his voice breaking. Everything I did. It was to protect you, even if it cost me everything. Marcus didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to lash out, to scream at the man who had abandoned him before he was even born. But another part, a deeper, quieter part, felt a pang of pity. His father wasn't innocent, but he wasn't entirely guilty either. He was just a man caught in a web too big for him to escape. When the sheriff led James and Roger away, Marcus stayed behind, staring at the empty cabin. Mrs. Delaney placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, she said softly. Your mama would be proud. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he nodded. The journey had been painful, filled with revelations that shattered his understanding of his family and himself, but it had also given him something unexpected. Closure. In the days that followed, Marcus decided to stay in Willow Creek. He couldn't return to his old life knowing how many families still suffered without answers. With the help of Evelyn and Sheriff Grayson, he worked to identify the belongings he'd uncovered in the field, piecing together clues that might reunite missing children with their loved ones. It was slow, painstaking work, but each success brought a measure of peace, not just for the victims' families, but for Marcus as well. Eventually, the town began to heal. The scandal that had haunted Willow Creek for decades came to light, exposing those responsible and bringing justice to those who had waited so long for it. And though Marcus knew he could never fully erase the scars left by the past, he found solace in knowing he had played a role in setting things right. Standing on the porch of his childhood home one evening, Marcus gazed out at the overgrown yard, now bathed in golden sunlight. The house felt different somehow, lighter, freer, as if the secrets buried within its walls had finally been laid to rest. For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it, with honesty, courage, and the hope of redemption.